My name is Rose Blaze, and I am the presenter for the live book show. Good evening. Good evening. We have our first guest this evening who's written a book called The Mission to End Slavery. Good evening. Will you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello everyone, my name is Denis Akinmolasire. I'm the author of The Mission to End Slavery. I've also written another book called Love, War and Glory. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the show.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well done. Well done. So the books are here and we're going to talk about them. Right. Initially, what I usually do is ask you to introduce yourself. So can you just give us in a few words, tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I'm trying to think, where should I talk about? I know where to begin. So if I look at my day job, in my day job, I'm a software engineer. And especially when I went to write my first book, Love, War and Glory, there's a perception as a software engineer that we're geeky, that we don't have creative license and that we can't do things beyond programming. And one of the things I wanted to showcase was that creative side to say, don't let, just because you do a certain day job doesn't mean you can't demonstrate certain other skill or succeed in other areas. So that was a big driver behind why I wrote my first book.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's great. And thank you for your intro. Okay, so let's start. What I really liked was the book was based in East London. Oh, well. I was like, yes, I can identify. It's wonderful. So, I could identify with the places you were talking about, which I really liked because then I felt included. So, just in terms of where we start, where would you ideally like us to start? This is such a huge subject. And reading the book, there is so much in it. I think, well, where do I start? I mean, all right, for me to give a rough understanding of what I'd read. So I read a book about a young man who travels back in time to try and decipher the mission to end slavery. So he ends up in various places, two or three different places ideally, along the timeline, trying to find the answers. And I thought it was really, really interesting, the very first mission where he ends up in a Yoruba village with Chief Oko and family and villagers, and it's at this point that he actually learns all the strategies that he needs to know about being a warrior and strategizing in war and being able to control his emotions and just to become a man, the rites of passage. So if I ask you to start there, about how the book moves on from there. So you tell us now.
Before I go and talk about what happened when he went to Chief Oka and went to the Yoruba village,
okay.
I need to take a step back, talk about how the book came to be.
Please do.
So when I was thinking about writing my second book, I wanted to write a fiction book, and I said, well, what would you talk about? Then I got thinking about all the different topics, and prior to writing this book, I read a book called Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race.
Right.
And one of the things that did come up was the role that slavery had in terms of what's happening in the world today. And I thought about it, I said, everyone talks about slavery in terms of what happened, but no one's ever asked the question, well, what if slavery didn't happen?
Wow.
What were some of the key events? What kind of world would we be living in? And then I thought about what if someone was able to travel back in time, change some of these key events. And that's what led to the mission to end slavery.
Right.
Excellent. So when I was thinking about writing my book, I looked at what are the different time periods that I wanted to write about. So one of the time periods I wanted to write about was what happened in 15th century Nigeria as we know it today, in terms of what happened when the Portuguese invaded. I thought that's a chapter of history that we don't really talk about.
A lot.
And that was actually the first place that Femi went to in part of his journey.
Right.
So the reason, if you look at all the other time periods that he had to go to, he had to end up going up against the Romans. That was the last mission. He had to free Nat Turner. That was the second mission and lead the rebellion. Then he had to go and stop the Freedom War, one of the slave ships from boarding. But he went to Nigeria first, but he went a year ahead before the Portuguese came.
Yes.
And the reason why he had to do that was, if he went straight up against the Romans, he would have been killed. If he went straight up to try and free Nat Turner, he wouldn't have succeeded. He needed to get the ground and get the tooling that he needed to actually be successful in his mission. So by going to Nigeria a year early before the events transpired, it gave him a year to train and prepare himself for the upcoming battles.
Yes.
And Chief Oko saw that. He had a sign from the spirits, as they were known, to say this guy's coming. And then things fell into place for him to be trained and equipped to basically prepare for the battle ahead.
Yeah.
And people may laugh at this comparison, but one of my favourite heroes that I often like reading about is that man. The reason why is, in his childhood, he lost his parents. But if he went and took on the criminal underworld straight away, he would have been defeated. So he had to go away, train, and become the Dark Knight as we know him today. And Femi had to go on a very similar journey in terms of preparing him to be the leader that was going to basically stop slavery from happening.
Yes, exactly. You know, when you're looking at them, you know, going on this mission to eradicate slavery, it's so important to think about in preparing to write this story, you know, what would I ideally need to do to be best prepared to go on this journey, to be relevant, you know, to be able to end slavery. So, okay, so let's talk now a little bit about Femi and his journey when he went to the Yoruba land.
So when he first walked to the Yoruba land, Mr. Diggity, who's the timekeeper, the person that sends him on all these missions, he gave us a few things in terms of what to look for. So we had to look for a symbol that Chief Oko was occurring that symbolised like leadership of the tribe at the time. And then apart from that, he was really unexpected. It was like go there for a year, but he didn't realise the journey that he would have to go on and all the tests. Because when he first got there, Chief Oko and Ade, who was the person that actually did his first bit of training, they really laid it on him. They just didn't give him an inch. He was really beaten to the ground.
But probably he felt challenged.
But he needed to go through that to basically face himself, because if he's going to go up against people like the Roman Empire, the people that kidnapped Nat Turner, they're not going to give him an inch.
No.
So he has to be prepared to face that sort of danger. And it's better to learn that in an environment whereby there's a chance to recuperate and actually, you know, understand where you're going wrong, then when you're staring down, basically staring down the barrel of a gun or sword, basically. So that was what they were preparing him for.
I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I think for me, looking at the various aspects of the book, that was the period I enjoyed the most. And I think, again, is because I could relate it to today. A lot of what Chief Oku and Ade taught him was life skills to be a warrior and to be ready for the fight, to be mentally prepared. So let's look at some of those, those aspects of the learning. So initially when he went there, he was very eager to just press on and do what it was that he needed to do. But Chief Oku had to slow him down somewhat and say to him, listen, there are aspects to being a warrior. You need to learn these rites of passage. So, for example, you know, he said to him, let's talk about the fight. Let's talk about the fight. What does that look like? And what do you need to be able to do to be best prepared for that? So, for example, here, one of the things I'd written down was that you need to be able to fight with courage and honor. So you need to be best prepared to face the fight, yeah? Because this is when the lions came. And I was petrified reading it. I just thought, God, they're going to kill him, they're going to kill him. He was just left, but he found this, I need to live. I have to fight. I have to, and you know, he had to be focused. He had to be focused so that he would be best prepared for any eventuality.
Was for real. That wasn't a test.
Because those lions were coming at him.
Yeah, that was real. That wasn't the test. That was just them resting at night.
Yes.
Then unfortunately they were in a land whereby the lions were getting. But that was the sort of danger he was going to have to face on his journey.
Yes, exactly.
And it's like if you come through sometimes in life, sometimes especially sometimes some people want to become a managing director. Yeah. Maybe they want to be a footballer. Yeah. They want to win the Champions League, Wimbledon, or whatever it may be. Sometimes it's not the title you remember, it's the journey you took to get that title, because you think back to all the sacrifices, you think back to all the days when you're having to trade in ice and whatnot. And moments like that are what Femi will look back at when he completes his mission. And I think in life, sometimes when you achieve your end up goal, you enjoy the celebration, but you also remember that I had to go through this. I had to be up at 6 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning to achieve the dream. So it's that sacrifice that you have to remember.
Yes,
because the sacrifice actually makes these titles worth it. It's like, this is what I was striving for all these years. Because often when you hear about sports people, athletes or successful people, they often talk about, when they get the goal, they always talk about, this is what I've been striving for all these years. Because sometimes when people are successful, they often see the end result. Like I remember a few years back in my field where I made it for vice president, bought my house and was an owner, and people saw, okay, now you're being very successful.
Yeah.
But people forget
The
maybe
journey.
people didn't see the journey in terms of what it
Yeah.
took to get those things.
Yes, exactly. And this is what Chief was trying to teach Femi. He says, you know what? You have to always maintain control. You always have to maintain control in your mind. Think, prepare, think, study the environment, know where you are, understand who the competitors are, understand who you are in all of that, and think about the skill sets you have to win, to dominate, to be in control, to best manage. And these are the things that he was learning, and I was thinking, wow, he's in the jungle. He's in Yoruba land, in the jungle, in 15th century Africa.
Yes.
But you could apply a lot of these strategies, like you said, to here and now, and being that holistic person that's maximizing all your potentials in this world here and now today. So they were talking about the test, the physical and mental training, and he was talking to him about having the will to succeed. And that was so important. So when we're looking at the will to succeed, how is it that, you perceived this?
I think sometimes in life there are going to be occasions whereby you feel like giving up. I've been there many occasions. Or there are times where it's like, how do I actually make this thing happen?
Yeah.
And sometimes the only thing that can get you through is that inner willpower, that adrenaline.
Yes.
That sometimes gets you over the line. It's like sometimes maybe if you're on the athletics field where you've done a really hard session and you've still got 1 or 2 more laps to go, it's just that inner adrenaline, inner willpower that actually gets you through it. Or during, like, I don't know, maybe you're facing a major issue at work, you try to forget a problem. Sometimes it's that inner will to
it's
actually
that inner belief, isn't it?
to get you over the line that gets you through it.
Yeah, it's that believing in yourself, that wanting to succeed, that wanting to excel. And so you need to develop that sense of pride, that sense of just willingness, as you say, to succeed, to be successful.
If you go back to when Femi was in 15th century West Africa, upon the Yoruba tribe, one of the things that Chief Oko asked him to do was he had to climb the tallest mountain, and with just basically his fist into some bare minimum tools.
Yeah.
And there were times where it was like on that journey, he could have easily collapsed and just given up, but he said, "No, this is my quest. This is my first.
This is your quest, your test."
And he had to carry on.
Yeah.
And then when he got to the top of the mountain, one of the things Chief Oko asked him to do was just stand and just practice and train and take in your surroundings, because one of the reasons why he asked him to do it was we wanted him to reflect on what you've been able to overcome.
Right.
But also he was then at a point where it's like you're one with yourself, and everything was starting to flow, and he was in tune with what makes him a great warrior and would propel him for the future battles.
So that was so beautiful, and in some ways he was liberated from a lot of these nemesises where he felt, can I do it? Maybe I can't do it. At this point, you have succeeded. So understand and acknowledge that you've succeeded. And I think even with so many of our young people today, because I was thinking about how can this be applicable? You say the war to end slavery. Slavery has inflicted and done a lot of damage over the years, not just to black people of all different races from different scenarios. For example, we have the child trafficking today, and that's an informed, we have slavery today, modern day slavery. And it's about the individual, really getting a good sense of self and taking the small wins, taking the small victories. And you can apply a lot of what I've read here in 15th century Yoruba land, and apply it here and now. So it's about liberating yourself. So he climbed this mountain, and there was this sense of, having conquered, having won. So I really appreciated that. And then you talked about the warrior spirit. So talk to us a little bit about the warrior spirit.
So the warrior spirit, I think, can mean many different things to many people. Right. Some people talk about your chi.
Yes.
Others talk about being in alignment with the stars. But I think it's about what is the thing that ultimately drives you. It's all about understanding what it is that makes your buttons tick, what it is that's going to make you be at your best, and what it is, and also understanding how do I make sure that within any situation I'm equipped mentally and physically to be able to handle those situations.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
It's really not an easy feat. And some people, religion is so important to so many different people, and it's about being grounded in your religion, because religion represents family, religion represents belief, and a way in which you can how can I say? Well, how can I say? If, for example, you're feeling down, you're feeling really distressed and not feeling good about yourself or life as it is today, religion can often be that saving grace. Where you can, go inside of yourself, if you like, take that journey inwards in order to try and, repair, do better, feel better. So that's wonderful. Okay, so then you went on to talk about, I know that Chief Oko takes him out into the night as part of his test, and it makes him battle at night or do something at night. I don't recall exactly, but what I do remember was the lessons that he had to learn. And for example, there was the unpredictability of night. There was the element of surprise and the change of tactics. So could you talk to us a little bit about
Are you referring to
the
the part where Femi had to battle the lions? Is that what you're thinking of?
I think so, because this was in preparation to face the Portuguese, because at this point he was near the end of this year's preparation before the Portuguese came. So I actually think I'm talking about the bit where they're near the beach and it's late, and some of the Portuguese had landed and a couple had begun to forage through the forest.
Ah, yes, that.
And at that point he had, he'd been prepared. All of the learning that he'd learned, he said, right, okay, so now is when I need to be brave. Now is when I need to strategize how to defeat the enemy. The enemy is now on the beaches. What do I do? Well, I've learnt this, And one of the things he learnt was the tactics at night. So the unpredictability, the element of surprise, and the change of tactics was some of the things he'd learnt.
So, if I remember correctly, the part you're talking about in the story, so Femi had completed his training, he
Yes,
passed the test, and he was
right.
officially deemed a Yoruba warrior. And then what ended up happening was a couple of Portuguese who were there to spec out the area, they had landed, and they had guns, and they were shooting up people in the villages. There were some significant losses. I don't want to spoil what those losses were, but certain people close to some of the key characters in that part of the story.
Yes, had died. His wife, Chief Oko's wife as well.
Yeah, right.
She died.
So I don't want to go into all the details. I need to leave some because I don't want to give away too many spoilers. But in that situation, what Femi had to do was realise, okay, what can I do? Because what he started to notice is that because of the way guns were back then, there wasn't like those automated rifles that just fire 60 rounds per second. Those were rifles where you had to reload. And Femi noticed that it took a certain minutes of time. And so he said, okay, when they're about to reload, then we're going to have a little ample of time. That's when we attack. And so when they were about to reload, that's when they attacked, because they were able to use their spears and then go after them during that period. So it's just about sometimes understanding, looking at the enemy, look at the situation and reacting to it.
That's right.
Sometimes about you receive a bit of information, what can you do with that piece of information to turn it to your advantage? So that was one of the skills that Femi had picked up upon.
Yes, which was brilliant. And I know at this point we came to the end of the time that he spent in Africa, and he was now revisiting with Mr. Diggity. Mr. Diggity was representative of the time shift, the person who did the changes in time. How could we say? Is a time machine? Was he a time machine or represented in a man?
So Mr. Diggity, think of him as like an overseer of time.
Right.
He's like a watcher.
Yes.
He's basically got this machine that allows him to view all of time. And he noticed that he just saw something in Femi. They said, okay, this guy is always complaining about the way the world is. Because if you go back before he went on the mission, there was a part when they were in the barber shop.
That's right.
And they're all talking about slavery and some of the things that were happening in the world. Like, for example, because I love football, they were talking about why is it people like Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, and even Gary Neville were able to walk into jobs where some of the best teams in the world. Whereas Sol Campbell, other players that were at their level in their playing career, they're starting up at Macclesfield. So
that was the first
why
chapter.
was that? Or looking at how people like Dwayne Chambers are treated when it comes to drug cheating, where someone like Alan Wells or even Andre Agassi, one of the most well-known sportsmen in the world, when it came to some stuff flushed under the carpet. So why is that? And so he notices, okay, the conclusion from that discussion in the barbershop was slavery is at the root of all this. Wow. So Mr. Diggity came to him and said, okay, so you think you can change all this? You think slavery is at the root of all this? Okay. I'm going to give you a chance to prove it. Here's a time machine. Here's where you need to go. Go and show me what you can do.
Interesting way to because it was a really interesting way that you formulated the story comparing, when you think about what it was that you wanted to write about. So I really thought that was interesting. So that was a nice, sort of overview. So he then travels to West Virginia to see Nat Turner in 1832. And he now comes in at the point of the rebellion. Nat Turner has been captured by a Mr. Butt. I don't know if Mr. Butt was representative of a Confederate person.
So if you look at the story of Nat Turner, Mr. Butt was
Yeah.
one of the key people that basically had Nat Turner lynched.
Right.
And was one of the key people that basically helped bring in Nat Turner and made an example of him.
Yes.
So he was very
As a slave.
influential in the story.
Yes, yes.
And the reason why I chose Nat Turner is he led one of the most successful slave rebellions out there, but
yeah.
no one really talks about it. It doesn't really come up in history.
Wow.
If you look at the history of the curriculum, we hear a lot about Henry VIII. Why do we not hear about Nat Turner?
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be a good way to shine
Yes.
some light on a
Yes, of
period
course.
that we don't hear about. And what I found interesting with Nat Turner, if you look at the historical accounts, he is depicted as similar to Femi, like another warrior. But at the point when Femi meets him, he's not meeting Nat Turner in the middle of battle. He's meeting him at the point when he's about to be captured, when he's about to be
and killed.
beheaded.
Yeah.
So when someone's at the point of death, sometimes, if you know you're about to die, you can be very reflective, maybe think about all the mistakes. So I thought it'd be a slight interesting trip to visit Nat Turner, what he was like at that stage.
Yeah.
Because when Femi met Nat Turner, he basically had to carry him for a little bit. He wasn't meeting as a Nat Turner as the inspirational warrior that history knows. He was meeting at the point where he was a broken man.
He was really a
He was
broken man,
literally 30
disillusioned.
seconds away from death.
Yes.
And what was interesting was to see how Femi had to carry it, but also bring Nat Turner out of his slumber. So I thought that would be an interesting angle to go in.
It really was, because, from what I read, he was really disillusioned. He thought at this point, I'm one man, I'm trying to fight this battle, I'm struggling. But Femi is very, very good at kind of bringing him back, reminding him of all the things that he'd conquered, reminding him that actually you are a leader, you are our leader, and we need you, and really really coaching him back. And he gets to a point where, Nat is at a place where he then begins to strategize again. Yeah. So one of the most interesting things, I'm trying to think what were one of the most interesting things that happened with Nat, because Nat was very much about mobilizing peoples together. This is slaves from different places, bringing them together and, preparing them for battle to win. So what I've got here is there is no other choice. There is consequences to your inaction that brings disparity to everybody. So basically, he's then talking about, the consequences to your actions. Just being clear that if you're going to do this, this could happen. So again, it's a form of planning. And I suppose I could ask you what it is that you felt that Femi brought to that situation.
Well, before I explain that, I need to take a slight step back in the journey.
Okay.
When Femi came to West Virginia, he was almost beginning to get into a circle of violence because he was basically disgusted by what he had seen. It just really angered him. At the start of the story, when he went to West Virginia, he met a young family where the wife just had a young kid.
Yes.
And the slave traders didn't go as treating him anyhow. And that really erupted Femi. But it was almost starting to because in Nigeria, Femi fought because he had to fight. Yes, he has to fight here, but it's to what extreme? And he was starting to almost act in a way that was almost reminiscent of the enemy.
Yes.
So it was almost like the case of, is he becoming what he hated? So he had to take a step back and say, actually, let's say we kill them. What happens in retaliation? They come at us.
Yes.
It's creating this circle of violence. So he had to figure out, well, how do I create, what can we do to win this war, but end this circle of violence? Because at the end of the day, as much as they had their numbers, he was up against basically a whole region's army. So he had to think, hang on a minute, I can't win this battle on his own.
No.
So he had to look for outside help.
Yes, and I read that. And was this a Maurice? It was a captain from, was it the Confederacy side? There was a captain who he had enlisted the help of, who was empathetic.
Yes,
to
one
the
of the captains who he ended up coming up was basically what it was. The captain helped one of the slaves' cousins, and so he wanted to repay him that favour because that slave had done him good in return.
Yes.
Because at the time, black people were very distrusting of white people because of how they were treated. So a lot of the revolutionists were a bit like, hang on a minute, this is a white person, why can we trust him? But then they heard the story of actually he helped one of their own. So they said, okay, let's try to leverage him. And in the end, it was his numbers that actually made a difference.
Yes, it did.
Because
they were in
what
battle
ended up
at one
happening
point, weren't
was
they?
there was a common cause. Like the revolutionists didn't like Seymour Butts because of how he treated Nat Turner. Whereas a captain, he didn't like Seymour Butts because he felt he wasn't represented or what he felt the U.S. Army should be about. So eventually they had basically almost like the enemy of my enemy as a friend, and they came together. Because if you look at what happened in West Virginia at the time, after that rebellion happened, there was all this civil war and unrest where everyone was just fighting. Whereas actually by uniting two people together, that helped stop the civil war.
Yes, of course. And I loved that story because there he'd found an ally and somebody, in a sense, to kind of emancipate, people from freedom, and working towards the emancipation of freedom in forming together, coming together, two different sides, and trying to see that actually the liberation of peoples is the way we should be going and not enslaving people. So that was brilliant. So in doing that, because that's kind of how that ended, where you got these allies together, he then moved into another timeline, Rome.
There was one before that, actually.
Oh my goodness.
The Freedom Ball, the
yes,
slave
there
ship.
was. There was the
third
slave
one.
ship. The Fredenberg ship.
Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to explore the I can't remember the official name for it, like the slave triangle that was formulated.
Right.
Because there was a series of ships that were basically taking slaves from the African and Caribbeans back to America and back to Amir. So I thought it'd be interesting to see what could you do to actually disrupt that flow of slaves.
Right. Okay.
And teach them how to fight back.
Yes.
And also, there was a lot of horrors that people went through on those slave ships. There was scurvy, there was sickness,
rape.
they're being beaten, raped.
Honestly.
So just having to go through that and experience it.
Epstein Kingnibs? What was the captain's name? Epstein Kinnibs, I think, something like that.
Yeah, he's got a very hard name to pronounce.
Yeah, he has, because it's not an English pronunciation. But he was a typical slave ship owner, typical. It was more about cargo than people. They weren't people, they were just cargo.
Yeah, and that's how he treated. He just saw them as
he
my
really
possession.
did commodities, and that's it. Like, and it was like, oh my God, really?
And the moment you fell sick, instead of seeing what he could do to cure it, he was like
threw them overboard.
Threw them overboard, literally.
That was horrible. And could you imagine how this impacted people mentally, the other slaves mentally, and people were being chained 23 hours a day and then taken away, raped, brought back, and she having to explain to them, this is what has happened to her, traumatized. It was just horrible. It was a
very heartbreaking chapter to write. Actually, just thinking about it, it's just like very dark. But unfortunately, that was what was going on in those times.
Yeah.
So I felt it was important to illustrate this is what we actually had to go through because slavery affected us physically, mentally, and it was just horrific. Some of the things we had to go through. So I did want to revisit those real horrors and highlight them to people.
And I think it's really important because, a lot of people will say slavery's over, slavery's ended, so come on, there's only so much you can say in terms of slavery. Slavery happened 300-400 years ago.
But the effects are everlasting.
Right. And this is the point. Psychologically, the impact is harsh and it's there. It's there. And it's about, how has that impacted our people? Is there a true understanding about how this has impacted our people long term? And with the institutionalized racism now, with unconscious bias, there is still this underlining oppression of people of colour.
I'll give you an example. If I'm driving somewhere from night and I see a police car, as a black person, I'm going to be honest, sometimes I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they can just stop you, especially if you look at what's going on being stopped for no good reason.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we've all known well the George Floyd situation. There's various others we can go on. It's still happening.
And this is
despite what's happening with George Floyd, the amount of times I would get a WhatsApp message or something say, someone else has been attacked, someone else has been raped. Or look at what happened to even the British athletes, someone who, should be used to think one of their own, they're getting attacked. It's like, why?
And this is the thing, and there's that constant oppression, and you can't discount that. You can't discount it. So when you read a chapter like that, you think, well, okay, what was the relevance of that? The relevance of that was about the psychology of slavery, the psychology of it. And, whether it's overt slavery or whether it's slavery of the past, slavery. and it impacts regardless. So, yeah, so again, it was a very, very heart-rendering chapter. And it was a good reminder in terms of recognizing the impact on us psychologically as a people, and how well, if not, that is being addressed, whether it be medically, because, okay, so as a social worker, there's a lot of my young people who will say to me, oh, you've sent me for counselling support and blah, blah. They don't know me. They don't understand me. So there was always an issue about them not feeling best understood, or feeling that the counsellor couldn't identify with them as individuals, couldn't identify with their story, just wasn't able to relate.
I think part of the challenge that we have in certain sections of society is for you to be, it's about having people that have empathy.
Yep.
And in most cases, the only people that are going to have empathy are the ones that have been through that situation.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're interacting with people that haven't been through that situation. So they're looking for, hang on a minute, you haven't been through what I've been through.
Yeah.
But when they see someone who's been through those circumstances, then they're going to be able to relate and open up to say, okay, this person gets it because he's been where I am.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that chapter, because it's a good way in which to open up and think about the psychology of it all. So yeah, thanks for that. So then we come to the Roman chapter, and I loved the way
I had a lot of fun.
this.
I have a lot of fun.
I love the way
that.
You depicted this with the Mark Antony's and the Cleopatras.
I had a lot of fun writing that chapter, because the reason why I picked that chapter, because if you look at, we learn about the Roman Empire, especially in the national curriculum here, but if you look at a lot of the things that were at the heart of racism, they did happen during that period. Yeah. And if you look at the Roman Empire, they were a brutal empire. They kind of dominated everybody. Yep. Except one group of people. There was one tribe that they were under the Kushkin.
Yes,
they were the only tribe that were able to go stand up against the Roman Empire at their peak.
Yeah.
And stop them invading. Everybody else was swept aside.
Yes.
I know the Vikings and everybody else came and beat them eventually, but that was when the Roman Empire was on the way down.
Right.
It's almost like you're facing Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, or Djokovic at their peak, and you're able to win. Or you're able to beat Usain Bolt whilst he was still breaking world records.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. And that's what the Kush Kingdom were able to do. So it made me think interesting. Well, what if the Hush Kingdom not just stood up to them and pushed them back? What if they actually won and took over? So that was a key period I thought I could revisit. And also, now we touch other things such as what was happening with Mark Antony, Cleopatra, and just also looking at Queen Amidala, who was Memeres rather, who's one of the key people of that region. So I thought it was just such an exciting chapter to explore.
It really was, and what I liked about that was that you made, for example, the two sisters as queens in varying parts of Africa, them coming together as allies and them utilizing their military precision and strategy. And it was brilliant the way that was exemplified in the book. I really loved that. So the two queens coming together and trying to convince then Mark Antony to join them to overrun Rome, and Femi being in and amongst all of that. So that was really interesting, and that's something that the reader can go and, review that last chapter. But having read the book, and like I said, it left a lot of poignant questions towards the end, which I'd written about. And which
Be careful not to give away the ending, because I don't want to give away too much.
No, exactly, which is why I'm not going there. I'm literally going to the part where, gosh, what questions does that leave me with? What questions am I left with? And I was left with so many questions, as well, relating to the end of the book, which again, you want us to keep hush-hush because it includes part of your sequel, and I hear that. But, for example, I'd written, how would we establish equality of expression, representation, and liberty for all? How would we establish that equality if the world were different, or in the instance it hadn't changed, or towards the end of the book perhaps I didn't find the ending I was expecting? So I'm thinking, okay, so how is it then that we establish equality, expression, and representation for all?
I think one of the challenges that we have to, if you look at the governments or sometimes the world leaders, unfortunately they're not representative of the entire populace. People that are often in power come from a very small minority in society. So how are you meant to represent the views of the whole world or the whole populace if your people only comes from a certain section? What we need to do is get people in power that are more representative on the entire populace. Right. If you go back to things such as Brexit, the reason why that happened, all the politicians, they just concentrate on themselves. but they didn't get an understanding of what are the views of the rest of the country and make sure those concerns are addressed. That's what led to Brexit. And that is a big problem that we have in governments, not just in the UK, but all over the world.
Right.
They're not representative of the people. We need to get a government that is representative of the people. Then once you do that, that's when you can achieve an equal thing.
Right.
But you've got to give them an equal playing field.
I understand that. And again, does that bring us back to a place where actually we can't be best represented or given how can I say, an all-round view if we're not equally represented in Parliament, for example? And so how does that happen? And it's about us going to the ballot box. Is it about people of colour becoming more politically motivated? Do you see what I mean?
It's an interesting
in order
question.
to represent in
It's an interesting
Parliament.
It's an interesting question, and I think the way it's a tough one. I think the way that if I had the answers, I would have probably written a book about that.
Yeah, exactly. But
I think what we've got to do is we've got to open the barriers. It's like if I look at my firm where I worked, when I started, I was the only black person in my team. Now I look at the team I'm in now. I'm one of the most senior people, but there are 6 people from Africa in my team, and we've got like 12 in London. 4 Nigerians, 1 Ghanaian, and 1 Kenyan. Whereas 12 years ago, I would never have thought that was happening. So what we've got to do is we've got to think about who the pipeline is.
Right.
If you want more black representation in whatever aspect of your organisation, you've got to look at who your source is.
Right.
If say you've got 50 graduates, if only 3 of them are black, as these people begin to progress as you go through a ladder, what's going to happen in terms of your representation of people at a certain level?
Yeah.
It's not going to be great.
No.
Whereas let's say it's out of 50 graduates, you had 20 are black, 25 are black. Then as they start growing up, you'll see great representation.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at these things from your grassroots. That if your team, if you look at, I'm going to go back to football because it's something I know well. If you want to know if you're a strong national team, you've got to look at, well, where's your talent? Where's your next generation? If you haven't got the right tooling, right things in place at grassroots level, by the time 5-10 years when that generation starts to go to a peak, you're not going to see the end results. So we've got to really tackle it as a grassroots level. We've got to make things such as politics more applicable for other types of people.
Yeah.
We've got to make people think, okay, politics. And I'm not into politics because I personally don't trust it, because I personally feel, and maybe this is going to be quite controversial, but I personally feel that when it comes to politics, a lot of it is about who the best liar is. Now, instead of, I just want to be controversial, but that's honestly how I feel. So instead of saying that to achieve A and B, we need to cut C and D, they'll say, yeah, we can do A, we can do B, we can do C. We don't care for you. All these other things are going to go. Be straightforward, be straight with people, be honest, and be able to say that, okay, yes, to get to where we're going to go, we may need to suffer a bit, or we may need to go through this. But if you're honest, then people will happily go on the journey with you, but they sell lies.
And this is the thing, I mean, years ago, I think people were more able to distinguish who the Labour Party are and what they represented, who the Conservative Party and who they represented. Now, a lot of the time, you're getting a crossover. So you're not clear of the, specific arguments of either. So, yeah, but it is an interesting question as to, looking at grassroots and thinking about why it is perhaps that, more black people aren't involved in politics. Maybe that's something that we need to be looking at more closely and understanding why it is as well, even at the voting booths, that we don't represent as much.
And also go into the inner cities. Because if you look at where a lot of talent, especially in London, is for where a lot of ethnic minorities are, they're in the inner cities. But how many of these types of organisations go into the inner cities to get talent? If they ever go into the inner cities to get talent, you will see a bigger difference.
So it's maybe about talking about how we can mobilise to look at that and look at ways in which we can encourage. So it's about looking at that, but that's a bigger question for another time.
Yes.
Is liberty for all safe? According to whose mantra, beliefs and practices? So when I speak about, is liberty for all safe? It's about the types of things, for example, that we can talk about openly and feel comfortable to do so, and things that would perhaps challenge racism in the face and would likely lead to consequences. So how safe it is for us to express, for example, we're not happy with this. In this day and age, it's probably easier than it was 50, or 100 years ago, not even 100 years ago, 50 years ago, because of the laws. For example, sus laws. If you look at sus laws now, a lot of black people will say, actually, this is not good for us. Most people think that it's disproportionately done in the way that the police will approach a man of color in the street. I say, well, hold on a minute, that necessarily wouldn't happen with any other race in the same way. So if I challenge, and people have challenged the sus laws and things like that, but how far has it got? How far have they got with that? And, do people feel
There have
safe?
been improvements, but not enough. Like, if you go back 50, 60 years ago, when people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were speaking out, they got shot.
Exactly.
Whereas you look at the Black Lives movements that were happening this year, people like John Boyega crying and passionately speaking.
Yeah.
If he did that 50, 60 years ago, what would have happened to him?
Exactly.
So there is a difference.
Yeah. So yeah.
But there's still more work needs to be done.
Yeah, and people feeling safe
And
enough.
it's not just about being able to
realistically-
speak up about these things, but okay, how do you identify the right courses of actions? Like, how do we make sure we're influencing the various laws? How do we make sure that if a police person is stopping you, what's giving them the right to actually do it?
Yeah.
Where are the laws governing that?
And people have challenged, but again, it's how far you get in terms of challenging. And, how meaningful is that? How safe do we feel as a diaspora of people in doing that? So there is that. Another question I've asked is, as individuals, who takes responsibility in regulating our lives? Who takes responsibility in regulating our lives? And I felt that was a really good question, because when I'm looking at Femi in the story, for example, he has to be taught to be a man. He has to be taught to be a warrior by a man who he sees as a surrogate father, right? So I say, as an individual, who takes responsibility in regulating our lives? And this is us, for example, as a diaspora of people. They say, are we a motivated people? Are we a progressive people? So ultimately, when you look at the microcosm, who takes responsibility for regulating our lives? Now, if I can start by talking about that, I think to myself, well, ultimately, we take responsibility, don't we? Don't we take the responsibility? Because it's my life. And I think, well, actually, do you? As a small child, did you have that responsibility? And is it ultimately, how can I say, the position of the parent to take responsibility? Because, some people today will say, well, this generation we've got now, they've got no respect, they're not responsible, blah, blah, blah. So why is it that they are the way they are? Is it peer pressure?
It's a combination of things.
Right.
So I'm going to say the answer to that question is it's everybody's responsibility.
Right. Okay.
We, as individuals, we have a responsibility to live our lives accordingly.
Okay.
We could go about break the law if we wanted to. We could go about trying and do something positive in the world. We have that power and we have that choice. There's the parents about making sure that trying to do the best you can to make sure you bring your kids up in a safe environment.
Yeah.
There's the government that are trying to basically run their various countries the best way they can. So we all have responsibility. So everybody has, it's about what can you influence.
Yeah.
So depending, so for me, it's about if there's something you can influence, then you have a responsibility.
Right.
So we can influence what we do in our own lives. Maybe we can influence how we run our companies or how we are in certain domains. It's about what are the things you're interacting with that you can influence. If there's something you can influence, then that's your responsibility.
Yes.
I think that's probably the best answer I can give to that question.
No, and I think it's a good answer, because ultimately, when we look at ourselves as a nation and a diaspora of people, it's about trying to be progressive. It's about trying to maximize our own potentials. It's about reaching that actualization. It's about being in the best place possible. So how is it that can happen? So that answer I can accept, and I think it's a well-rounded answer. So okay. So the last one I had was, in what way does unity define strength?
Well, it's the old saying, strength in numbers, because
Right. Okay.
if it's one person, people can gap him easily and cloud him out. But if you've got 100, it's a lot of people to gap on 100. So when you've got more people, it's almost like that consensus. When you've got more people that are behind you, it's a lot easier to make change.
And again, I hear that, and then I question that, though, in some ways, in that, yes, unity in numbers is great, because in numbers, you have more backing, and you're more likely to conquer what it is you want to do. But looking at that, it's about what type of mindset does this collective have? You know, because if the collective's mindset is destructive when looking at how, you know, how best, for example, to better ourselves as a diaspora of people, it's important not just to have the numbers, but it's about this, you know, the strategies adopted, as in Femi in the book. It's about having the right strategies and the right mindset in order to move forward as a collective to conquer or to, you know, do well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Denis, for coming today.
It was a pleasure coming.
Yes, and thank you so much for talking about the book. Can I ask you a little bit about now, how is it and what it is that you wanted to inspire in the reader?
So, good question. So, what I think probably the answer is, what do I want them to take from the mission to end slavery?
Yeah.
So, I probably want people to think about some of the key things that happened in slavery and get appreciation for maybe different aspects of history that maybe you wouldn't necessarily read about in school, that you don't necessarily hear about. So feel free to go and read about people like Nat Turner, Queen Armeras, the Kashkindi, because you'll find a lot of interesting information. So hopefully there's a bit more awareness in terms of some of the other aspects that maybe you don't hear about. And maybe also think about, well, what kind of world would we be in if slavery didn't happen? Understanding what some of the key events are. And just something also to looking back at Femi's journey. Sometimes we're all going to have problems in our life. There are going to be things that we need to think about and need to fight for. Just maybe something, maybe you can look back at Femi's journey and be inspired in your own journeys in life. So hopefully those are things that people that read a book can take away.
Wonderful. And I totally agree with that, and well said, you know, because it really left a lot of questions for me in terms of, well, okay, Rose, what responsibility can you take? Well, okay, Rose, you know, what do you think? You know, what questions were left? So in the questions that I posed, you know, thank you for, you know, thinking about that and answering. So again, let's talk about what's next.
So what's next? There is going to be a sequel for The Mission to End Slavery that addresses the ending and talks about, because the theme for that book is, what if slavery never existed? The theme for the second book, I don't want it, so hopefully it's not going to be too much spoiler, is what could be worse than slavery? It's going to explore that theme.
What could be worse than slavery? Wow.
Yeah, it's going to explore that theme.
That sounds scary. Excellent. Okay, so you've also written another book.
Yes, that was my first one.
Take that, put that. So, okay, so Love, War and Glory is a series of short writings, which I really enjoyed reading. I laughed with some of them, and I felt you were answering the questions you posed within it. It's like you'd give an ideal, and then you'd start to talk and break it down in your view how and what it should be. So I don't know if you want to tell the reader a little bit more about the book.
Okay, so Love, War and Glory. So basically what happened was, in December 2017, I was at home on my computer. I noticed that I had all these old poems and things that I never did anything with. And I looked at it and I thought, well, why don't you turn this into a book? And so I got thinking, I got investigating about what it would take to write a book. And then that led to me producing my first book, Love, War and Glory. So Love, War and Glory, spoken words for full scene, that's the full title. It's really a collection of short stories, narratives and poems that's more the themes of love, war and glory, but from a everyday real world context. And just talks about some of the things that I've seen in life, some of the things that I've seen in the world, and just tries to give that real world perspective to try to make sense of some of these themes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, they're very short stories, and it left me thinking and questioning and just pondering about what my responses to the poems would be, or the stories would be. So thank you again. Love, War and Glory, and the remainder of the title, Spoken Words for All Seasons. Yes, as well as The Mission to End Slavery. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Denis. It was wonderful to have you. Audience, viewers, readers, thank you so much for being with us this week. Really appreciated having you here. Thank you. Thank you, Denis. Thank you.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.